Alright, so I said I would do a video covering the topics of what it was like before living in a car and after living in a car. And even though I've talked about these things before, I always said I would try to go a little more in depth on those topics. Now, let's first start out talking about living in a car. So during the time I lived in my car, I would consider my kind of like home base to be Seattle, Washington. I say that because when I lived in Seattle, I had a storage unit, and then I also had a mailbox rental. And I've talked about this in other videos, but essentially I had gotten a mailbox service through the UPS store, and then later I got a different mailbox service through another company. There was in Seattle, they have mailbox rental places that are kind of more of like a mom and pop type shop. Okay, so anyways, the reason I'm mentioning that I personally had a storage unit where I kept all my stuff, this was my personal choice. So if you're planning on living in your car, maybe you don't want to have a storage unit. Maybe you want to keep all your stuff with you no matter where you're going to be. So even though I said that I considered my home base to be Seattle, I was not always in Seattle because I had taken some various jobs. Some were seasonal jobs, some only lasted for a few months. So this is why I traveled a lot. But I was still in Washington State, so even if I was working like 2 hours away from Seattle, I could always come back to Seattle and get my stuff, check my mail, get my stuff out of the storage unit if I needed to. But other than that, I was pretty much just staying in my car. Now, this is the other thing that I've mentioned, that during this time, I took seasonal jobs. There was one job in particular, I was working for a national park. Another job, I was living on an island, which is a whole nother video that I should probably do sometime, because island living is a little bit different from regular living, because being on the island was very isolating, and trying to get on and off the island was always an issue because you needed to take a boat, obviously. So yes, I lived in my car, but I kind of had all my stuff in a storage unit. So these jobs, they would last like for a couple of months. Maybe on my days off, if I had weekend or something, I might go into Seattle. That way I could visit with people, I could get my stuff out of my storage unit, I could check my mail, and then I would return back to work. Now, also during this time, I've also explained how I started dating someone, and that person lived in Portland, Oregon. So at that point in time, my intention was, of course, to try to, I guess, move myself to Portland. So I was doing a lot of traveling to go to Portland, to apply for jobs there, go on job interviews, but all my stuff was still up in Seattle. And if people are curious, the distance between Seattle and Portland could be roughly a 2 to 3 hour drive, depending on traffic. So for me to travel back and forth, yeah, it was kind of a bit of a distance, but I at that point was kind of just staying in Portland for a while. So this is why I say, even though a lot of times I'll refer to Seattle as kind of my home base, there was a lot of time that I was not even in the Seattle area. I was working in other locations. Okay, so I can go into more of a long, drawn out description of how I even ended up in my car. I've talked about it previously, but as I've mentioned before, I moved to Washington because of a job. So I wanted to take a job that was offered to me, and I didn't have really any place to live. So I just sort of thought, okay, well, I'll just travel up there to Washington. I'll start this job. I'll work for a little while, maybe stay in hotels, motels, sleep in my car, whatever I have to do until I get settled in the new state at the new job. And what I had considered to be a temporary situation really kind of turned into a longer situation, in which I was staying in my car, living in my car, and then of course doing all these other kind of like odd jobs and traveling and whatnot, kind of throughout the same time. When I talked about moving into a place after living in my car, that wasn't just I go from my car to living in a house. That was a kind of a transition too, because I was trying to rent rooms from people. I was going on Craigslist. There was people subletting where they only needed someone in their apartment for a month before their lease ended or something like that. You hear a lot about couch surfing, that sort of thing. But this is also when there was still kind of like the beginning of Airbnb. So I was sometimes staying in an Airbnb for a couple of days, then sleep in my car for a couple of days. Then I would get like a really cheap motel for a couple of days, then sleep in my car for a couple of days. And so this is why it wasn't just a transition of going from living in my car to living in a house, there was more to the story, right? And so that's why I thought, well, maybe I should talk more about that, because sometimes I will just assume that people have to live in their car not by choice. Maybe they're in a bad situation in life and they just end up having to live in their car because that's the only place safe enough for a roof over their head. Okay, so then there is kind of like this difficulty of how do I go from living in a car to moving in an apartment? They want me to do credit checks. I need to come up with all these deposits. So I understand that. So that's why I said it wasn't just like a easy peasy thing. Now, part of the problem is when I would find a place where someone's like renting a room or something, usually that meant the lease is in their name. My name's not on any of the bills. There's no way to prove that I actually live there. I'm just renting a room. Some people are obviously renting rooms not legally. If they're supposed to have some sort of like renter's license or permit, doesn't mean they always have one. So if it came down to now I have to prove my residency, like I said, my name's not on any of the bills and my name's not on the lease. I don't have a way to prove my rental history. And so this is why I can see where it would be difficult for someone who's been living in their car, and then maybe you're renting a room from someone, and then maybe you want to get your own place, but there's no way for them to really do a background check on you. Now, the other part of that was because I'd mentioned taking these seasonal jobs. Now, sometimes seasonal jobs, they will offer you housing, whether it be they give you like a room, which, I mean, unfortunately, maybe a room with bunk beds and you're sharing the room with other people, kind of like a dormitory style. So some of the seasonal jobs with the national park, that was kind of like that, where you share a room with other people and then you have like a communal bathroom. And then some of these other seasonal jobs are really for people that are already living in the van, living in their RV, and so they just offer RV parking. So you basically would be living in your RV while you're working the job. But then when you're trying to prove residency or you're trying to prove your rental history and everything, when you just try to explain to someone, well, I've been living in my van for 6 months, a lot of times that's not much to go off of, and they really want more than that. So I can see why this whole transition of going from living in a car to having a more permanent residence can sometimes be difficult, just because of all the background checks and that sort of thing. So let's talk more about my personal situation, because I could talk all day till the cows come home, talking vaguely about what you could do if you were living in your car, but let's talk about what I actually ended up doing. So I had been living in my car. I had done a couple of these renting rooms from people type of thing. The very first place I had rented a room from someone, it was an older lady. She had a house in a very nice neighborhood. The neighborhood that she lived in was near this place called Golden Gardens, just kind of like a big park, beach. I don't know how to explain it. But if you're familiar with Seattle, then you know where Golden Gardens is. So it was a very nice neighborhood, and she rented out a bunch of rooms to different various people. So all the people that lived there, they all had their own rooms, but we were all pretty much strangers. And I really only stayed there for about a month when I realized I didn't really like living there. I wanted to move somewhere else. Now, also during this whole time, I had a job, I had an income. So if anyone wanted to do a background check on me, I had income, I had pay stubs, I had all that stuff that I could prove that I was capable of paying rent somewhere. But, every time you stay somewhere or move into a new place, usually they want some sort of deposit, like first and last month's rent, or several hundreds to $1,000 deposit. A lot of times you have to put deposits down to start utilities with your local utility company, like if you want to get internet and all of that. And so what I started looking into was places where some of that stuff was kind of all included, meaning the utilities was included in the rent and the internet service, that sort of thing. It was all part of the rent. And of course, because I had a car, usually in Seattle, you have to pay extra if you have a car. You have to pay for parking, because I guess a lot of people don't have cars. It's a pretty walkable city. You can get around by light rail or by bus. But if you happen to have a car, like I did, you're gonna have to pay like several $100s a month just to park your car. And certain neighborhoods can be very limited on where you're allowed to park your car. So yes, there is street parking, but certain neighborhoods, you might actually have to pay to get a permit on your car to just park in that neighborhood. And of course, You might think, well, how does all of Seattle park their car if you don't get this permit? Well, you can park somewhere maybe for like 2 hours, but if you actually live in that neighborhood and you want to like park your car there on a daily basis, it's best to just get the permit. But maybe someone who's just visiting or someone who's just passing through that neighborhood, new in town, whatever, you usually are limited to like a 2-hour parking time. And then you either got to move your car to another place for 2 hours and then move your car to another place for 2 hours, or you get a parking ticket. So, I mean, that's just kind of how it is in certain neighborhoods of Seattle. And like I mentioned, since there is so many places, like so many apartments where people are parking on the street, sometimes it's even hard or difficult to find parking because there's so many other people that are parking on the street. And so when I mentioned that a lot of people don't even have cars in Seattle because you can get around on public transit, the issue with that is a lot of apartment complexes, if you're going to be renting an apartment, they don't offer parking. They don't offer a garage or a parking lot or anything like that. So this is why you usually have to go find somewhere to park your car. And there are parking garage services, and they can charge several $100s a month. And so you can sign up for one of these garage services, but it's a monthly fee that you have to pay. Usually it's like automatically deducted from your bank account or something like that, auto pay. It's like you're signing a lease just for your car. Okay, so that's me talking about some of the things that I ran into when I knew that I was going to go from living in a car to basically having to now get an apartment and find a place to live. Okay, when I lived at the lady's house for a month, she lived in a nice neighborhood. You could just park in her driveway and everything. Okay, but that's why I said, like, a lot of homes, some of these homes were built a long time ago. So a lot of homes, they don't have garages, they don't have driveways. Maybe the home was built back when people still rode horses. I'm not real sure. So parking has always been limited in the Seattle area. So if you're wondering, well, then how did you get by living in your car? Well, so a lot of times you can park somewhere overnight. Okay, but in the daytime, it's the daytime hours that have like the 2-hour limits. So sleeping in my car at night wasn't a problem. It was just trying to find available parking when there aren't everybody else trying to park their car on the street. And so I could stay somewhere in my car overnight and sleep in my car. But then during the day, luckily I had a job, so I could just drive to my work and park either at my work or near my work. But if you're just a person who's just trying to move to Seattle and live in Seattle, you really have to keep these things in mind, that if you're going to get a place to live, a home or an apartment, you're going to have to figure out your parking situation if you're even going to have a car. But if you're going to have a car, it's probably going to be pretty expensive just to like keep your car somewhere. Okay, so now let's get back to what I was saying about kind of like my first apartment. My first apartment, after living in my car, after working at seasonal jobs that provided me with housing, after renting rooms from random people, my first apartment that I got in my name, that I made enough money to get the apartment, that I had the money for the deposits, all that stuff. I moved into what is known as a micro apartment. And micro apartment probably sounds exactly what it is. It's very tiny. Okay, it's like moving into something that's like the size of a walk-in closet. Okay, micro apartment in the Seattle area, there are several different types. Some are, it's basically just a room, right? A room with like a twin size mattress, and that's about it. Now, some you have your own bathroom. Some you have to share a bathroom with other people, like down a hallway. Mine, I have my own bathroom, but you don't have any kitchen or anything. There is a big shared kitchen with all the other people that live in the building. I was okay with that because I don't cook much. But, that's something to take in consideration if you're concerned about cooking your own food, having a microwave, keeping your food in a fridge, having to share space with other people. So it's definitely nice to have your own room. It's a big step up from obviously living in a car, but it may not be ideal or glamorous or whatever. So I moved into one of these micro apartments. Now, the micro apartment that I moved into, I think these are really supposed to be like temporary housing for people. because, you know, we have a lot of people that are moving from other places, coming to Seattle to be in the tech industry or to be in, you know, the medical field, that sort of thing. But it's supposed to be, I guess, temporary. So you have somewhere to stay for a little bit before you move on to wherever you're going to live eventually. And so this is what I found, is that after living there, like, they really only give you, at least in my case, they really only give you a 6-month lease. They don't offer anything more than that. And when the 6 months are up and you're like, hey, I want to sign another 6-month lease, they don't do that. They'll put you on month to month, and then that's it. Meaning they can, when you're on month to month, they can end your lease whenever they want. And you have no security to say, I have a lease. You only know that you're good for that month. Okay, so I kind of knew this going into it, and I moved in the place. I knew it was going to be really tiny. I knew it was going to be hopefully temporary. I wasn't really sure. I moved into it because it was actually very affordable. I didn't have to pay all the extra stuff. Like, I didn't have to pay extra for internet. I didn't have to pay extra for electricity or water. Like, it was all like a flat affordable rate to move into this tiny little apartment. And when I say tiny, I mean, like, if I outstretched my arms, right, okay, I could probably like touch the walls of both sides of the room, because that's how tiny it was. They offer it furnished, and furnished, what that meant was, yes, it's technically like a twin size mattress, and then they had like a couple like shelves, and other than that, I felt like just my own belongings. I still kept my storage unit because the place is so small. You don't get a closet. You don't get somewhere to like put all your clothes or your stuff. So I still kept my storage unit, which is like an additional cost that I was paying for. But that was just kind of my situation of me staying in this place. And I mean, I personally liked it because I was living in the heart of Seattle. And the reason why that's a good thing, and this is why, you know, part of the whole point of me wanting to like live in Seattle and live the Seattle lifestyle, is that everything is like right outside your door. Meaning anything you want to do, there's, you know, there's restaurants, there's bars, there's grocery stores, there's little shopping stores if you wanted to buy clothes. Everything was just nearby and walkable, and all the tourist sites and everything that Seattle's known for, everything's right outside your door. It's like you just go outside and Seattle's your playground, right? So I was really excited about not only living in Seattle, but kind of living the whole Seattle experience, what it's like living in a city. So if you're someone who, like me, had never kind of like lived in the big city, I'd always kind of lived like a suburbia type lifestyle away from the city, where you have to like travel like a half hour to get to the city. It was great. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the experience. Maybe that's not what you're looking for, but that was part of my whole experience of moving to Seattle. Having that apartment, going outside was basically, there's Seattle, there's everything, joy. And so over time from that apartment, then I kind of like, I moved on, and I can talk more about that in other videos. But I wanted to just kind of address this whole thing of what it's like going from living in a car to trying to find a place to live, because I didn't just go find a place to live. There was kind of a transition of multiple different scenarios of where I actually ended up, from living in a car to renting rooms, staying in short-term hotels, working jobs that gave you housing. Like, there were just a lot of things kind of going on all at once. And I always throw in the caveat that I was dating someone for a brief time. So I was going and staying with them, essentially. So, you know, that's why I didn't need to stay in my car, because I was, like, I guess you could say, living with them for a time. But that situation was only going to work out if I actually found a job in the same city as them. And it's not that I didn't find a job. I was going on job interviews, but I just ended up finding a job somewhere else. And I can kind of get into that a little more in another video. The only reason I'm previewing or hyping that is because one of the jobs that I had applied for during that time was like a King County job. King County is the county where Seattle is. So it was like a government position. And to go through the whole hiring process of that is a whole thing I could do a whole video on, because getting hired for a government job is There's a lot of steps. There's a lot to the interview process. There's tests they make you take. There's background checks and security checks and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, I could do a whole video about that. But because I was pursuing that at the time, that I was dating this person in Portland, but then I was also like going through the hiring process through King County, it became apparent that I probably was not going to move to Portland because I was going to now pursue this county job in Seattle. So I would say that that's part of why that relationship didn't continue on, because when you are dating someone and you're looking towards the future of which way is this going to go, it's kind of like, well, how can we pursue a future if now I've been pursuing in my future, I'm thinking I'm going to have this government job and I'm going to be, you know, getting paid really well and getting a lot of really good benefits by working for the county. And their whole plan was to continue living in Portland, and they had no interest in moving up to Seattle to be with me. So it was just kind of like our futures were not going to be going in the same direction. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. But yeah, so I think maybe on my next video I will try to talk more about the time before I moved into my car. You might think like, why am I going backwards in the time frame? But because I feel like that was also not a gradual thing either. It wasn't just like one day I woke up and I'm like, hey, I think I'll live in my car. I just think there was kind of like a series of events that led to me living in my car, that led to me seeking employment in another state and then taking a job in another state, which meant I was going to have to move, and I wasn't sure how to go about moving, because to move to a whole new state, you need somewhere to live if you're going to move to a whole new state, right? And you need somewhere to put all your stuff, or move all your stuff, or get rid of all your stuff if you're going to move to a whole new state. And so that's why I said I'll probably talk about that in another video in the future, talking about my past. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching.